Earlier this year, I attended the Women's Rights March. I decided to go because a few of my friends and family members were going, and I thought it would be a valuable life experience. As I arrived, I saw thousands of women of all ages, colorful signs, supportive husbands, minorities, and many members of the LGBT community. Until then, I hadn't realized how many people support the feminist movement and the amount of girls, even our age, that aren't even given some of the most basic rights that others take for granted. It gave me a different perspective on feminism and allowed me to realize what the term feminism is truly describing. Because according to Merriam-Webster, feminism is the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. Feminism has become more relevant as history progresses and continues to prove its relevance in America and in underlying themes of many literary works, including Happy Endings written by Margaret Atwood.
Contrary to popular belief, feminism is not solely based on female superiority. However, it is focused on equality of the sexes and seeing in the gray area. This refers to the integration of gender stereotypes. Instead of seeing black and white, men as strong and women as weak, the gray area is combining the two and letting each individual make their own decisions. Feminism is also entirely focused on each individual person, no matter their gender, race, or religion. As Isabella mentioned, at these feminist and women's rights marches, there are hundreds of people who are there, not only for women's rights, but for the rights of all people.
Other times, women and men are expected to live a certain way. Throughout history, women have been expected to cook, clean, and take care of her children and husband. This limits women to focus only on the pleasure of others rather than herself. This historic stereotype also limited women from interviewing for and earning a potential career. On the other hand, men were only to focus on their career and supporting their families financially. They were never expected to care for their children or provide emotional support for their families. This scenario was extremely common in the 1950s especially. However, it is still a common stereotype in the typical American household.
A clear example of this is featured in Happy Endings. Author Margaret Atwood explains how her character John has a steady, respectable job and is getting ahead in his field. John is married to a woman called Madge. They have 2 children and a charming house, which they bought just before the real estate values went up. This particular section of Atwood's story is a clear demonstration of the common 1950s gender role stereotype. But then I tell you that this story was not set in the 1950s, but is actually set closer to the 20th century. You would expect stereotypes like these to be abolished by now, but unfortunately this is not the case. The vast majority of people in America will probably say that they can identify and understand the inequalities between men and women. But unfortunately, most citizens of third world countries cannot. As mentioned earlier, oftentimes each gender is expected to live a certain way, and although this stereotype has begun to disappear in the United States, most third world countries have to live by these expectations.
In countries such as Africa, Asia, and India, most lower class women continue to be stereotyped as an altered version of the 1950s housewife. A mother's job on any given day may be to look after her children, cook meals, and please her husband. Sometimes girls are forced into marriages and pregnancy at as young as 12 years old. Option B of Atwood's story shows scenarios of this horrible situation. Atwood describes that John merely uses her body for selfish pleasure and ego gratification of a tepid kind. He comes to her apartment twice a week and she cooks him dinner. You'll notice that he doesn't even consider her worth the price of a dinner out. And after he's eaten dinner, he fucks her, and that he falls asleep while she does the dishes so he won't think she's untidy, having all those dirty dishes lying around, and puts on fresh lipstick so she'll look good when he wakes up. But when he wakes up, doesn't even notice, he puts on his socks and his shorts and his pants and his shirt and his tie and his shoes, the reverse order from the one in which he took them off. He doesn't take off Mary's clothes, she takes them off herself. She acts as if she's dying for it every time, not because she likes sex exactly. She doesn't, but she wants John to think she does, because if they do it often enough, surely he'll get used to her. He'll come to depend on her, and they will get married. But John goes out the door with hardly so much as a good night, and 3 days later, he turns up at 6 o'clock, and they do the whole thing over again. Mary gets run down. Crying is bad for your face. Everyone knows that, and so does Mary, but she can't stop.
Around powerful people, it is an instinct to feel threatened and become submissive towards the individual. Atwood's story shows the submissive side of most women through Mary's actions. Obviously, she does not want to have sex with John, but she becomes submissive, thinking that he will enjoy it and hopefully fall in love with her. The Women's March for Feminism this January showed the absolute beauty of equality and the progression of women's rights since the 1950s and throughout history. The march and Atwood's story help show men, women, minorities, and members of the LGBTQ community that life doesn't always end with happy endings.